One of the hardest decisions to make is picking a favorite Mega Man game from the lineup on the Super Nintendo. Perhaps you like the gritty atmosphere of X3, or the brilliant color schemes and soundtrack of 7. You see this guy? He's been trying to decide which SNES game is his favorite. Now, instead of just ranking the 4 games in some rigid list, I want to have more of an overall discussion. Mind you, when I say SNES Mega Man, I'm just talking about 7 and the first 3 X games. In the United States, I don't consider Mega Man and Bass a Super Nintendo game. It's a Game Boy Advance game. Also, I've never played it, so it would be difficult for me to compare it to other games. I'm also not counting Mega Man Soccer for more obvious reasons. If that was on the list, it would be like somebody saying their favorite 3D Mario game is Mario Tennis. Like, yeah, okay, smartass, it's a 3D Mario game, but you know what I meant when I asked the question. So without further delay, let's find the best SNES Mega Man game. For me, it's fairly easy to not pick X3 as my favorite. Don't get me wrong, I like the game a lot, and I really enjoyed it when I made my video about it. For once, I had finally given the game a fair chance, and I finished it. Overall, it's a damn fine game, but it does not hold up like the others. In general, when you hear me offer criticism of these games, though, please understand that I still really enjoy all 4 of them. They aren't perfect, and just don't take it personally. X3 doesn't hold up for me because of the very frustrating early game. Also, the pace generally felt a lot slower than the first 2. I really enjoy the breakneck speed of the first X games much more than the methodical feel of X3. Of course, the soundtrack does complement that feeling very well, though. However, I'm a bigger fan of the upbeat, high-energy tunes featured in X and X2. There's some great songs in X3, don't get me wrong, but they just don't quite hit like the others do. Next, a slightly more difficult decision for me is to not have Mega Man 7 be my favorite. I've gone back and forth about this game a lot. In my video, I probably said it was one of, if not my favorite in the entire series. It's a very special entry, as it features immense polish when looking at all the classic games. Also, it's difficult to put it in this discussion because it is a classic game instead of an X game. Typically, I think I like classic Mega Man as a series more than X, but I would say X1 and X2 are preferred to 7 for me, if you catch my drift. Anyways, Mega Man 7 is a phenomenal game. I love the art style, the music, and the insanely difficult final boss fight. Classic songs like Freeze Man and Slash Man will always be some of my favorite in the series. The first Wily stage theme is insane as well, with its intense shift in mood and absolutely rocking bass line. If we were doing a list style video, I would likely say that X3 is at the bottom, followed by Mega Man 7. As I said, it's not too hard for me to put X3 last, but saying 7 is lesser than both X and X2 is definitely something that I may want to revisit sometime. So that leaves us with 2 left, and possibly the hardest decision when it comes to ranking Mega Man games. X or X2. Both games have had significant impacts on my life. The first one was my introduction to the X games, and I spent the most time with that one in my earlier years. However, when I was in college, staying up late playing games on summer nights, X2 was my go-to for quite a while. I mentioned before that I started to quickly beat the game almost once a day, and I was even considering to do a speedrun of it. However, I gave up on that ambition when I watched actual speedruns of the game and saw the skill gap that I needed to overcome. Despite giving up on my speedrun ambitions, X2 became my definitive favorite in the series at that time. I loved how ridiculously fast-paced the game was. I know that in the 16-bit console war days, Sega boasted their blast processing and sonic speed, but have you ever played X2? It feels just as fast, if not faster than Sonic at times. I know the Sega Genesis technically had a faster processor, and that's why they used it as a marketing gimmick. However, the SNES could certainly hold its ground with games like X2. However, it's been quite a while since I had my college summer nights playing the game, and I have been able to reflect a little more on the decision to pick between X or X2. The first X game is incredibly nostalgic, and I do legitimately think it is a required game for anybody to play. Egoraptor's sequelitis video, where he delves into the way the game teaches you its mechanics without beating you over the head with tutorials, was so important for me in my early teenage years. I learned to appreciate X more than I already did, and that's why it's necessary for anybody to play it regardless of if you actually grew up with it or not. In my original video about X2, the only flaw I could really come up with was the Wheel Gator fight. I don't like having to wait around for him to come out of the swamp. This fight goes against the tradition of feeling rewarded for attacking the boss with his weakness. Instead, many people in the comments told me to just use the Mega Buster. But I don't want to. I just defeated frickin' Reggie Bushroot over here and got the strike chain, so I want to use it. Other than that, I honestly don't have any major problems with X2. The soundtrack is phenomenal. I love the screeching, lightning fast guitars, though I do understand that some folks aren't fans of that soundtrack, but for me, it's exactly what I want. Just an absolute blast of adrenaline at all times, especially at parts like that first X Hunter stage. X1 switches up its mood when it goes into its final area, which is also something that I have praised greatly. Again, this is why this decision is so difficult. I love the super high energy of X2, but I also can gush over the tonal shift in X1. My answer to the question of X or X2 legitimately might just depend on the day. However, where I think I need to give the nod to X2 is that there's a lot less frustration in general. I am not a huge fan of vertical segments in Mega Man games, and I don't think many people are. Think about stages like Elect Man and Crash Man from the first two. Those stages are really not my favorite, and Capcom knew to generally stay away from this kind of design moving forward, I would say. In X1, Boomer Kawanger and the first Sigma stage have a little bit too much vertical for me, and they're pretty frustrating. The first Sigma stage in particular is almost unbearable without the charged chameleon sting, and I have not completed it without it for many years. The challenging vertical segments in X2 are actually somewhat fun since they just involve difficult wall jumps and not this mess. At the end of the day, when it comes to the soundtracks, the first Sigma stage in X1 will always be a top track for me, but when looking at the overall package, I think I need to go with X2. Lastly, X2 has a little more replayability with the decision to kill the X-Hunters or not. So it's for those reasons that I'm going to have to stick with X2 as my favorite of the SNES games, and probably my favorite of the entire series. If I put them all on a list, I would go X3, then 7, then X, and then X2. But keep in mind though, I'm a huge fan of all these games, so ranking them like that maybe doesn't really do it justice, and it's not an easy list. Again, perhaps I'll have to revisit it in time like I want to do with my list for the classic games. The video for X3 itself was already almost a year ago, so perhaps I need to play it again. Anyways, let me know how you would rank these 4 games, and let me know what you think of my choices here. Do you think this decision's as difficult as I do? So let me know in the comments, but thanks for watching.